Thank you very much, Mano, for giving me this opportunity to speak a few words about Buddhism in the Himalayas. Now, I'd just like to bring your attention to this photograph, which is something that I took from the Dochula Pass in Bhutan. This is not Everest, this is Jumolhari, a very sacred mountain in Bhutan. People are not allowed to climb this mountain, and therefore it has been preserved in its pristine condition. So right around Bhutan, that same aspect of respecting nature is observed. Now, this is the Himalayan region, as you can see. Bhutan is just one country here, and you get Sikkim, Nepal, then of course this is a part of India, all of this. And then to the north is Tibet, and then the south, of course, is India. So this is the Himalayan region. And I'd like to say that having lived for 5 years in Bhutan, I was quite conscious of the fact that in Bhutan, which is the last Buddhist kingdom, that there is a pronounced consciousness that Buddhism is under threat, because to the north of Bhutan, where you see China, actually it is Tibet, China gobbled up Tibet, which was a Buddhist country. And then here you see Sikkim, which was also a Buddhist kingdom, but that was gobbled up by India. And so Bhutan is very aware that it is sandwiched between two giants, and that they have to do everything they can to preserve their Buddhist heritage and their Buddhist practices, which I have to say they do excellently. Now, as you can see, this is Tibet, which was completely taken over by China. And so Buddhism was more or less crushed in Tibet. I will speak more about that as we go along. Now, introduction of Buddhism to the region. Took place actually originally from China. From China, it came to the Himalayas, but later, so originally Mahayana Buddhism came to the Himalayas from China. But later in the 8th century, it came from Taxila. Now, you know, Taxila is a Buddhist university, and there was this Buddhist monk called Guru Rinpoche, who came from Taxila to Bhutan, and he practiced meditation on a mountain top in Bhutan, and they say he gained enlightenment there. And the type of Buddhism that's found in Bhutan is called Vajrayana, and then there are certain tantric practices associated with that. And Guru Rinpoche is regarded as a second Buddha, or the Padmasambhava, who is considered to be born of the lotus. Now, as you know, lotus represents enlightenment. Now, Guru Rinpoche, when he came to Bhutan, he incorporated local practices into his preachings. And that is a feature of Mahayana Buddhism. So in countries where Hindu practices are predominant, like in Nepal, there is a kind of assimilation of Hindu features into Buddhism. And in Bhutan, there are local practices which have been incorporated. So rituals have the flavor of practices that existed before the introduction of Buddhism. So for instance, in Bhutan, they had a practice called Bonism, which is belief in the goodness of the world, and animism, which is an attribution of spirituality to natural things such as plants, rivers, and the environment. So the respect for the environment, which is an integral feature of Bhutan, actually started even before Buddhism. So a pantheon of deities exists in the Mahayana tradition because of this assimilation. And that is why they call it the larger vehicle. Mahayana means larger vehicle. Yana means vehicle, and Maha, of course, is large. Now, getting on to some special characteristics of Mahayana Buddhism, as I said before, Mahayana is regarded as the larger or the greater vehicle. And one, as I said, assimilation of local practices. And one cardinal feature of Mahayana Buddhism is the Bodhisattva ideal. That is that anyone aspiring to attain enlightenment has to consider that that effort is being done not simply for oneself, but it's done for the sake of all sentient beings. And therefore, a person who aspires to be enlightened has to practice what is called the bodhicitta. That is, you do it for the sake of all sentient beings, and then you postpone parinibbana in order to come back and help other people. So that is this bodhisattva ideal that is found in Mahayana Buddhism. And another feature of Mahayana Buddhism in the Himalayas is the unbroken meditation tradition. Now, as you know, in Sri Lanka, which was colonized, our meditation tradition was broken. And in fact, we had to bring back Upasampada from Thailand and Burma, whereas in the Mahayana countries of Tibet and Bhutan and that area, Ladakh, there is an unbroken tradition. Now, another characteristic of Mahayana Buddhism, which I found, is what is called the Bardo state. Now, here I'd like to show you this book. This is called the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying. Now, in this book, they explain that there are 6 levels of consciousness, and that now in our Theravada Buddhism, when we die, we refer to the relinking consciousness, and then the Gandhabba, and then there is the consciousness of the next life. Whereas in the Mahayana tradition, they believe that there is a state called the Bardo state, and that people can remain in that state for a while before rebirth. So there are various rituals that are practiced in this regard. Now, since I was in Bhutan for 5 years, I attended many funerals, and in fact, the funeral of the Queen Mother also I attended. So they have rituals which go on for 7 days, like us, and then 40 days, because they say that is a critical time. And then during that time, they do a lot of rituals and then offer merit to the departed person. And they say that one must not show sorrow, because in the Bardo state, the person may then not be able to separate him or herself from the previous life. So, and that could lead to a kind of a woeful or preta existence. Therefore, at funerals, people don't cry, and they simply accept the death, and they perform these rituals for 40 days. Another feature is that there are different categories of monks and many sects. Now, I think in Sri Lanka, there's a profound misunderstanding regarding these different categories of monks. Now, the categories of monks found in Bhutan, which I saw at first hand, and I had a lot of links with the monks because we in UNICEF, we had a program with the monk body because they were enrolling a lot of small children, and to make their health conditions and sanitation better, we had a huge program with all these monasteries, and I had a lot of links with the monks. So there are different categories of monks. There are a category of monks who are lay preachers. I think you might put some of us in the service of the Buddha as those lay preachers, because they live a lay life, but they engage in Buddhist practices, and they also conduct rituals. So those are the monks who get married. Now, that is one category of monks who live with the community. Then there's another category of monks that live in monasteries. Now, in the monasteries, they have very austere practices. They are celibate, and they practice various, they live an extremely Spartan life, because on top of those mountains where the monasteries are, it's extremely cold. And so they have a very meager existence, and they practice meditation. And then there's another category of monks who don't have any contact with lay people. They are monks who are right on top of mountains and who practice meditation full time. I'll come to that again later. Now, in terms of the assimilation of various practices into the Buddhist scheme of things, there's a huge iconography and a symbolism. Now here I'd like to just show you this book. Now at the time I was in Bhutan, this book came out, and they declared that this was the largest book in the world. It's called the Celestial Gallery. So it explains all the iconography that exists in the Mahayana system. Now I'll explain some of those things later. And I have to say that in the Mahayana tradition, there's a great emphasis on compassion, and that's linked with this Bodhisattva idea that whatever you're practicing not simply for yourself, but for the sake of all sentient beings. So that compassion is an integral component of the practice. And then together with that is the practice of non-self, total lack of arrogance, and the practice of humility. Now here, I'm coming to the deities of compassion. This is the Celestial Gallery. Now, one of the most important deities that people respect in the entire Himalayan region is White Tara. Now, White Tara represents compassion. Now, this is not some deity that people pay pujas to. That's not the idea at all. It is a concept of compassion which one has to integrate into one's own consciousness. So they say that White Tara has to reside in one's heart, within one's heart, so that whatever you do it out of compassion. So it's an integration of compassion into one's own consciousness. And so there's another manifestation of Tara, which is green Tara. Again, the same concept of compassion. And then we have the protectors or the Dharmapalas. Now, this is an assimilation of Hindu practices, and this Mahakala is linked to the Hindu goddess Parvati. And what they believe is that Mahakala and these protective deities actually protect the Dhamma. They are like guards protecting the Dhamma. And then there's also Yamantaka, another protective deity. And they say that this is a wrathful emanation of Amitabh Bodhisattva. And Buddha is also depicted as the medicine Buddha or Vaishajya Guru, where, of course, the ultimate remedy for all afflictions is the attainment of enlightenment, and that is what the Buddha taught, how to overcome all afflictions. And then the healing qualities of the Buddha are manifest in this representation of the Buddha in this form. And of course, when people are sick, they perform various rituals invoking the healing qualities of the Buddha. Now, in terms of samsara, now this is a very popular depiction of samsara. Now you can see this is the wheel of existence. And now here you get the human realm. Then these are the hells where you get the petas and the hells and the fires of hell. Then this is the animal kingdom. And these are the Devalokas. So that is the depiction of samsara. And then right at the center are the three reasons why people are being churned around in samsara from one place to another. Why is it that we are all within this circle of samsara? It is because of greed, hatred, and delusion. So that's at the heart of this. And then you can see that the entire samsaric cycle is in the grip of Mara. So at any time, Mara can just shut his mouth and death comes to all who are within this samsaric cycle. And then outside of this conditioned state are the unconditioned state of enlightenment. So that's outside the samsaric cycle. So this is something, actually, this is a picture that I bought when I went to Tibet, and I have framed it and I look at it regularly. And I have to tell you that these three things which keep us in samsara. So greed is depicted as a boar. Then arrogance and pride and self-view is depicted as a bird or a cock. And then the snake represents hatred. So these three defilements lead to samsaric existence. And it is the eradication of those three that enables one to attain enlightenment and escape from the grip of Mara. Various symbolic expressions are found in the Mahayana tradition. Now, this is again a very popular symbolic representation for cooperation. The elephant, the monkey, the rabbit, and the bird are cooperating because together they can perform so many things which the elephant cannot do on its own, or the monkey cannot do on its own, or the rabbit cannot do on its own, or the bird cannot do on its own. So these are things that are part of the culture. So, the importance of cooperation is sort of ingrained because of these symbolic representations, which become a part and parcel of people's lives. And then, of course, bodhisattvas are also given a lot of prominence. Now, this picture, of course, everybody knows, this is a picture of the statue of the laughing Buddha, which is actually found in China. Now, they say this is a depiction of Maitriya Buddha showing happiness. It only shows happiness and prosperity. So this is something that's found in China, and people keep it in their homes, and they say it brings good luck and helps people to be happy and to be prosperous. And then we have Avalokiteshvara, who I think in our way of thinking is the Maitriya Buddha, the Buddha of compassion. And as you may have heard, the Dalai Lama, the current Dalai Lama, is regarded as a reincarnation of Avalokiteshvara, the Buddha of compassion. So that is how they look at it. And then another bodhisattva is Manjushri, who epitomizes wisdom. So they practice various rituals, and when they want to emphasize wisdom, they always think of Manjushri. And when they talk of wisdom, they talk of the importance of non-self. Now, this is something the Dalai Lama emphasizes in all of his talks. He emphasizes compassion and he emphasizes non-self. And then Kitstigarbha is another bodhisattva, and they say he helps people to overcome their bad karma. And then Samantabhadra, another bodhisattva, who promotes meditation and practice and, helps people to achieve happiness. And then they also refer to celestial Buddhas, that is those who have already attained Buddhahood, like the Sakya Muni Buddha. So if you go to Tibet and you go to the Potala Palace, they have all of these, the statues of the Sakya Muni Buddha as well as the Bodhisattvas. Now, in terms of the philosophy, there is no difference in the fundamental aspects of the doctrine between Mahayana and Theravada. They follow the Four Noble Truths and the Noble Eightfold Path. That's a part and parcel of their practice. They practice samatha and vipassana meditation. They subscribe to the 5 precepts, and they, assimilate, or they try to develop the 5 powers. They are aware of the 5 hindrances, and then they subscribe to the to Buddha's dependent origination analysis. And the Trilakshana is very much a part of their practice. So the emphasis, I have to say, in the Mahayana tradition is the emphasis on practice. Whereas the difference I notice comparing the Mahayana practices, which I saw, and what we have in Sri Lanka is that in Sri Lanka, people are very interested in the theory of Buddhism and the study of Buddhism, and they love to, study all the suttas, study all the different discourses of the Buddha and the commentaries made, etc. Whereas in the Mahayana tradition, the emphasis is on practice. So what they do is they take one of the aspects like wisdom, and then they perform all these rituals, and then they encourage people to get rid of this idea of self. So the non-self is very much emphasized there, and the idea of universal compassion, compassion to all sentient beings. So that again, now there is no time actually to explain some of these things, because in their temples there are various things now, like called the prayer wheels, the prayer flags. All those things are done in order to practice metta meditation, but in a different way, where they send thoughts of good wishes to all sentient beings. So I have to say that really speaking, in both Mahayana and Theravada, rituals emanate from local practices and beliefs, because now even in Sri Lanka we have various rituals which actually, I mean, quite frankly, don't have anything to do with Buddhism, but they are linked to Buddhism because they have been, rituals which existed previously. Now, as I said, in the Himalayan region, there's a awareness that Buddhism is under threat. And this is particularly so because of the Chinese invasion of Tibet and the destruction of monasteries. Now, as you can see, this is the Potala Palace in Lhasa in Tibet, which I visited. Now, in the Potala Palace, at the time that the Dalai Lama was there were 1,000 monks residing there. Now, when I visited the place, there were only 8 monks. Actually, it made me cry because it showed the relentless onslaught on Buddhism in Tibet, and the fact that about 30,000 monks were killed, and these were all unarmed monks who were practicing meditation and practicing universal loving kindness, but they were slaughtered. And then misery was brought to all those who were prominent in Tibetan society, because in Bhutan, I knew a family. They were relatives of the king, and their mother was actually a princess from Tibet who escaped to Bhutan, and her relatives were tortured, and she explained to me all the sort of the brutality that was unleashed in Tibet. And when I went to Tibet, I saw for myself how the Tibetans are all in one area. And actually, I stayed in the Tibetan quarter, and they are still so devout, and they are still practicing Buddhism, but the Chinese onslaught is, overwhelming. And so they are bringing in more and more laws to say that if people don't learn Chinese, that they can't get a job. So gradually, the new generations are being converted into the Chinese pattern of the People's Republic of China. So unfortunately, I have to say that we in Sri Lanka, we have not done anything regarding this. We have been silent, and so have so many other countries, because people are frightened of China and they don't want to even talk about the atrocities that were committed by the Chinese in Tibet. I saw that with my own eyes, and that's why I'm explaining that to our friends in the servants of the Buddha. So killing of thousands of monks and repression of Tibetan Buddhists, and it forced the Dalai Lama to escape from Tibet. Actually, he was forced by the others to escape. He didn't want to escape. He was only very young at that time, but he came to Dharamsala in India, and that is where he currently resides. Now, as you know, the Dalai Lama is, I would say, the most prominent Buddhist monk in the world. And he is regarded as a bodhisattva and the manifestation of Avalokitesvara, the Buddha of compassion, which we would call Maitriya Buddha. And then he teaches his people in Tibet. He's still in touch with the people of Tibet. They come regularly to see him. And he says, it's very easy to practice compassion towards those you like, very easy. Towards your own friends and relatives, it's very easy to practice compassion. But it is towards your enemies that you have to practice compassion. And now actually, Olande Ananda Thera, I had a discussion with him because he also has been to Tibet. And actually, the first time I met Venerable Olande Ananda was in Tibet. When I visited Tibet, he was there. And I recognized him as a Theravada monk, and I went and spoke to him. And he has also met the Dalai Lama. And he told me that when he went to see the Dalai Lama, that there were some people who came from Tibet and spoke of some Tibetan bhikkhunis who were being tortured by the Chinese. So the tears had come into the eyes of the Dalai Lama. He had cried, and I think Venerable Olande Ananda was also very moved by this. And then, of course, what the Dalai Lama said was, you have to practice compassion towards your enemies. There's nothing else that we can do because we are non-violent. We don't practice violence, we practice compassion. And then another thing that the Dalai Lama emphasizes is the concept of non-self in daily life, that is the practice of humility. And this is very evident in that region. And the Dalai Lama says that somebody looking at you should be able to say, oh, this person is a Buddhist, by the way that the person conducts himself, lack of arrogance, lack of pride, and the practice of humility. So the Dalai Lama, as you know, was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 1989, and also the highest congressional award in 2007. So I have to say, although he was recognized in this way, nothing has been done by the international community who are so concerned about human rights to save the people of Tibet who are still suffering. Now, the Panchen Lama is another important figure, and he is considered to be a reincarnation of the Amitabha Buddha, the Bodhisattva of infinite light. So in Tibet, he is considered to be second only to the Dalai Lama. But unfortunately, the 10th Panchen Lama was arrested by the Chinese, and he was held as a prisoner for 15 years. And after that, he disappeared. So possibly he was killed. And then the Chinese appointed their own Panchen Lama. And that Panchen Lama appointed by the Chinese is not recognized by the Dalai Lama because there's a special procedure for recognizing the next Dalai Lama. So the current Dalai Lama has not recognized the Panchen Lama that the Chinese have appointed. So I guess the Chinese appointed somebody from the Chinese People's Party. So as I said, Panchen Lama is second only to the Dalai Lama, but the current situation again is very unsatisfactory. because the Chinese control is increasing through all of these things. So some salient points to be remembered is the attempt to destroy Buddhism in Tibet. But of course, it resulted in the spread of Buddhism to the West, because with the Dalai Lama escaping from Tibet, everybody took note of that. And the Dalai Lama has become the voice of compassion and the most prominent Buddhist in the world. And Bhutan is the last Mahayana Buddhist kingdom. I have to add, and I think Bhikkhuni Uppalavanna, you will be happy to know this, in the Mahayana tradition as practiced in the Himalayan region, there's a very well established Bhikkhuni order. They have their own monasteries, they have their own system, and they are thriving because they get the support of the community. So when I was there also, to give danas, I used to go and give danas to monasteries on mountaintops, and also to Bhikkhuni monasteries also, which are on mountaintops. So they are lovely places, beautifully maintained, and the Bhikkhunis are, well recognized and respected in that society. So we need to appreciate and learn many things from the practices found in the Himalayas. That's what I would say. Now, if you look at Sikkim, I showed you in that first map, Sikkim, which is a tiny little kingdom sandwiched between Nepal and Bhutan. And this is the Buddhist kingdom that disappeared because Indians invaded and annexed Sikkim. And the king, being a practicing Buddhist, he held back his army. He said, you cannot kill. And so the king did not retaliate and held back his army and practiced nonviolence. I think this must be the first and only example of the practice of nonviolence during an invasion. Now Sikkim has become a province of India, and the king is a recluse practicing meditation. Now Nepal, as you know, is a Hindu kingdom. And this is a picture of the Bauddhanath temple in Kathmandu. Now, large number of Nepalese, lot of Nepalese that I spoke to, claim that they are Buddhists because they say the Buddha was born in Nepal, and they say we are Buddhists. And this physical link with the birthplace of the Buddha, Lumbini, is very strong in Nepal. And therefore, there is a kind of integration of Buddhism and Hinduism in Nepal. So when you go to Bauddhanath here, you see Hindu practices, Buddhist practices. It's a very sort of lively place, this Bauddhanath, wonderful place. And you see this sort of coexistence of Hinduism and Buddhism. Now, Ladakh is a hidden part of the Himalayan region. It is actually not a separate country, but a sort of like an annex of India, a hidden part of the Himalayan region. And Buddhism is very important part of their daily life. There are no murders in Ladakh, no thefts. But for how long, we don't know, because again, the Chinese pressure from the north is very strong. And even recently I read that, China is trying to annex Ladakh as well. So we don't know how long that will go on. And I have to say that in Bhutan too, The crime rate is very low. I think these are the indicators. If a country is a Buddhist country, then I think it has to show results. And in Bhutan, the results are there because the crime rate is very low. In my entire 5 years, I did not hear of a single murder, and certainly I did not hear of robberies. There are no beggars there. And so it's a country where Buddhism is an integral part of daily life. So we can say that Bhutan is the only Mahayana Buddhist kingdom that exists today because Sikkim was overtaken by India. So pride of place is accorded to Buddhism in Bhutan. And Je Kempo is the head of the monk body. And he has the same rank as the king. So he can also pass decrees. So sometimes for Vesak and so on, he passes a decree that for the whole month, that people should not eat meat. So vegetarianism is practiced for months. And I have to say that in Bhutan, there is absolutely no slaughter. They don't slaughter animals in Bhutan. They don't go fishing in rivers because of the respect for human life and the first precept. So practice is an integral part of daily life. No slaughter of animals in Bhutan. Honesty and humility are the hallmarks of the Bhutanese. And the meditation tradition among monks is very strong. As I said, lay monks are involved in rituals. And the practice of humility and non-violence is there from top to bottom. From the king downwards, the nobility and the high-ranking ministers, they are all extremely humble. Now, in Bhutan, as you know, being a mountainous country, there are very few roads. But if there is any sort of problem in any remote part of the country, the first person to go to that place is the king. And he doesn't travel in a helicopter. He travels just like the other people. He walks to that place and then he sleeps in an ordinary hut given by the people. Now, this was actually told to me by the current king, who was the crown prince at the time I was there. And then he, because, you know, he was very close to UNICEF, and for the Children's Summit, which took place in 2002 at the United Nations General Assembly, I went there with the Bhutanese delegation, and I sat with the delegation, and it was headed by the crown prince. And so I had a chance to, you know, talk to him quite a lot. And he said that he goes on these trips with his father to mountain tops where they travel on foot. They don't carry anything. They don't carry blankets and this and that. They don't carry anything for themselves. They just go there, and whatever the people provide them with, and these are very poor people, they just sleep on those things, eat what they give. And so the king is very close to the people, and they practice absolute humility. I mean, this is amazing. And when people talk about themselves, that is regarded as sort of arrogance, you know. So in Bhutan, whatever they have achieved, they never talk about those things. So respect for the environment, as I said, is completely ingrained. So, and of course, complete devotion to the triple gem. Now, about the environment, I have to say that at the moment, about 70% of the country is under forest cover. That is not because of the Kyoto protocols or the COP26 or anything like that. It is because of the ingrained respect for the environment, because they don't like to destroy the forest on account of the animals and creatures that are living in the forest. So they don't want to disturb those things, and therefore they don't go fell trees. They don't, even if they want to fell trees, they have to get permission, and then they perform a ritual, and they might just fell one tree for which they have got permission. So that is their respect for the environment. And Bhutan went for a written constitution in 2002, and in their constitution, it is stated that 65% of the country has to be preserved under forest cover in perpetuity. So Bhutan is a net, has net credits when it comes to the environment, and it is giving oxygen to India, which is a highly polluted country. So Bhutan donates oxygen to its neighbors. And so, as I said, gentleness and right speech, these are hallmarks of the Bhutanese. Respect for elders and religious activities. Now, with regard to this, I have to say that Bhutanese, they live in sort of a family house. It has about 3 or 4 stories. And when their parents or grandparents, when they become old, they go to the top tier of the house, which is like a shrine room. And most of the day they spend in the shrine room meditating and chanting. And then the young people regard it as their responsibility to provide food for them and provide all their requirements. And they consider that to be a meritorious action, which they have to do for their elders who are full-time engaged in Buddhist practices and meditation. And then care for the animals is also paramount there, because as I said, there is no slaughter of animals. They don't slaughter animals. And meritorious actions are all done in the name of all sentient beings. Now, the meditation tradition is very strong in Bhutan. So some of these monks that I knew through our program, they told me that now this is called the Tiger's Nest. This is a monastery on the side of a mountain where Guru Rinpoche came and practiced meditation and attained enlightenment. So that place is preserved, and it takes about 3 hours to climb to the top of this. And I'm fortunate that I went there 3 times. And so it's considered to be a very sacred place. And other monasteries are also constructed in a similar way on mountain tops and on the sides of mountains. So before a person embarks on full-time meditation, there are preliminary practices that they have to master. Now, one of the monks that I knew, he said that of course, all the monks practice meditation, but the serious meditation where they practice in isolation, they have to be able to master certain practices. And one of the practices was that they dip their robes in water. Now it's all iced water because it's so cold on those mountain tops. They dip the robes in iced water. They wear the robe, and they have to be able to dry it in 5 minutes through the practice. And I thought this must be the fire kasina that they are doing as a form of meditation to be able to do that. Because on these mountain tops, there are, they don't have heating, nothing. They are seated, and right round is snow, but then surrounding them, there is no snow. So they have to be able to control their body temperature, and that is one of the preliminary practices that they have to master before they get on to the higher meditation practices. And then this Bodhisattva vow, which they call the Bodhicitta, that also has to be developed. where they practice for the well-being of all sentient beings. And then the first solitary meditation is 3 months, 3 weeks, and 3 days. So they have to, they are in isolation during that time. And now if you want to give dana to those monks, when we gave dana, we went and we have to just put dry rations into a bag and we leave it on the mountainside. And they just have one pot in which they cook a meal for themselves. And they are not in contact with lay people. They only meet their teacher. So they are in isolation. So when they succeed with the 3-month course, the next one is 3 years, 3 weeks, and 3 days. And then the next one, the next year is 7 years. And when they have mastered that, then it's a lifetime. So there are certain monks who are up on those mountain tops and they will never come down. It's a full-time meditation and they are up there in those mountain tops in sub-zero temperatures, living a very meager existence. So in terms of daily life, I have to say that in Bhutan, the integration of Buddhist sentiments into daily practice has also come into the arena of development goals. So the development goal of Bhutan is gross national happiness, whereas in Sri Lanka, it's gross national product. Rest of the world, it's gross national product, which only, as you know, to calculate gross national product, we add up the value of all goods and services produced within the country, and that's called the gross national product. Then if you want to get an idea of the standard of living, you divide that by the population, and that gives you a GNP per capita. Whereas in Bhutan, the 4th king of Bhutan, King Jigme Singye Wangchuk, who was a very, very wise person, he conceptualized this gross national happiness, which consists of 4 elements. First is equitable socio-economic development. So remember, the difference is equitable socio-economic development. And then the second is the preservation of the environment, which again is enshrined in the constitution. Third is good governance. So good governance is very, very strong in Bhutan. So if there is a whiff of anything other than good governance, those officials are subject to summary dismissal. That's it. So if you want to see good governance in practice, please go to Bhutan. And then the 4th is cultural and spiritual development. That's the 4th aspect of gross national happiness, which is their development goal. So they have also developed indicators to measure gross national happiness. And a lot of professors from various countries have come, and economics people and the statisticians and so on, and they have developed models to measure this. So now Om Mani Padme Hum, I'll explain. This is the mantra of Avalokiteshvara, which is on the lips of every Buddhist in the Himalayas. It means the jewel of compassion and the lotus of wisdom dwell in the innermost heart. So that is what people have to practice. That compassion has to come from within your own heart, and wisdom has to dwell in the innermost heart. And it invokes the spirit of universal compassion and the aspiration for enlightenment indicated by anatta, which is non-self. So in conclusion, I would like to say that it is Buddhism that unites Asia. The majority of Asians practice Mahayana Buddhism. And Buddhism emanates from the Sakyamuni Buddha, and the goal of every Buddhist is the attainment of enlightenment. Namo Buddhaya.